me, I embody this just by who I am and when I walk into the classroom and from where I come. But I think there is something about the imagery and the use of images in our theological teaching that's so important. It clears the ground even before the learning can happen. So I make sure to have representations of a range of different persons, a range of different cultures and contexts. Images, I make sure to have women represented as well as I might have men represented, or images that speak to cultural events and processes that people don't usually think about, just to pique their interests and get them to think that there is a different way. And I think insisting on different images clears the ground even before you can get into deeper conversations around the theological themes. They speak as loudly as the biggest words that you would want to use in your teaching and learning. So I don't think this can be underestimated. And it forces us to have to reckon with the issue at hand that classical theological education often silences otherness of all kinds. So bring otherness into the framework of our teaching.
I'm trying to be quite creative about how I use them and where I source them from. So I often teach pastoral care, for example, as one subject, and often there aren't that many diverse resources on the pastoral care shelf. So I'll go a little bit further, a bit more beyond, look at getting resources from spiritual care, getting resources from chaplaincy resources, even getting resources on different topics from, say, for example, from eco-theology, looking at climate grief and finding more global voices within those contexts. My own culture, my background is from an Indian culture where a lot of learning is done through oral tradition, a lot of spoken word, a lot of storytelling. And I want to sort of, in the classroom, think about how we can use story as a valid learning tool, as a place where we can, give space for students to share their stories, maybe case studies, that we can do some shared learning, and that we can use story and narrative as a basis for learning.
I'm really keen that in biblical studies classes, students explore how they read the text and why, as well as how the text has traditionally been read and how else it might be read. So in the context of GMH, this means moving to a position where all approaches to the Bible are valid and respected, rather than assuming the superiority or the normalcy of a dominant, usually a white culture. So I use an approach that's based on a four-source model of theological reflection, and they begin with 4 C's. So I think about context, culture, conviction, and curiosity. You can use them in any order. But I get students to think about, what am I curious about in this text? What makes me think, or what do I want to know more about? What's its context? How has it included in the original text? And how in the context of hermeneutical history has it been interpreted? And then what does my culture say about it, and how might other cultures read it? And then what's my conviction about it? What do I personally think? How do I read it? And I find that when the 4 sources interact, we can begin to unpick white colonial understandings and learn from other contexts, and it becomes a very enriching process.
In my introduction to the Bible module, which I teach primarily focused on the Hebrew Bible, that part, I begin by asking the students to look at a map and see that the Bible is written out of context that we would describe as North Africa and Southwest Asia. That's our starting point, the geographic reality of the context of the Bible. I ask the students also to reflect on themselves as readers, and I do that by getting them to complete a questionnaire before they come to the first class, and then to talk about that with their neighbour. And there's lots of different questions on the questionnaire about their idea of biblical authority, what are some of their favourite passages, etc. But the last question is about whether they think their own identity and context makes a difference to how they read the Bible. And even if they answer that in a variety of ways, that question is then being raised and they're recognizing that people will read the Bible in a range of different ways, potentially. I try and make diversity visible through PowerPoints and other kind of visual material as we work through the Bible. So making sure that when I'm talking about a scholar, their image is displayed and we can see the range of different scholars that we're engaging with. And I do that particularly to highlight places where there isn't diversity. So, for example, discussion around the historicity of the biblical text. That's often dominated by white scholars, white male scholars from North America and Europe. And so that raises questions of why it is that this particular group of scholars are interested in those questions and why some other scholars seem less interested, and what that helps us to see.
I try to do a range of different things to engage with diverse perspectives in my courses, and the approaches I take depend on the topics being covered. So, for example, in my preaching course, I've been able to find a range of excellent sources which examine preaching from different cultural perspectives. So in addition to setting these as course reading, I also use videos of different preachers who employ a range of diverse sermon styles. Students watch these videos in advance, and then we evaluate together the different approaches in class, drawing on the reading to help inform our understanding and expose our own cultural assumptions and prejudices. Whereas in my doctrine module, I set pre-reading and post-reading for each lesson, ensuring that one of the set readings each week always represents a global majority perspective. I mix up which I assign for pre-reading and which for post-reading, and so that the students learn to read the different perspectives in conversation with one another. And I set questions to accompany the readings, and these aim to help support students in interpreting what they're reading. In a module I teach on discipleship and pastoral care, I don't really use set reading. Rather, I seek to offer a wide range of interdisciplinary perspectives, drawing on sociology, psychology, or religious studies, and these readings change year on year. Within this course, I'm less concerned that students are learning the content of a particular pre-reading, and I'm more interested in simply exposing them to a broad range of different cultural perspectives and interpretations. Through this eclectic reading, I want students to learn to decenter a Western cultural perspective on topics such as death or childhood or singleness. And I want them to experience locating their assumed norms within a wider global picture. In class, we then use diverse case studies which further draw out these cultural differences. And so overall, what I'm trying to do in these different ways is seek to equip students to be inquisitive, to challenge them to complexify topics and decenter their own perspectives, and also to inspire them to be lifelong learners who have the confidence to engage critically and compassionately with a range of perspectives.